I'd like to welcome everybody to our session today. My name is Sheri Weppel, and I'm going to be your host. I'm going to be your presenter. I'm going to be just everything you need today for the next 1 hour. I will try and end a little bit early to give you some time back to your day. But what we're going to be talking about today is our learning and development strategy for a hybrid workforce, recalibrating the nuts and bolts. So it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that we talk about often because when the pandemic began, we all rapidly shifted the way in which we work. And we were in a very interesting environment in which we didn't really have anything else to do but work. We could spend time with our families, which was fantastic, but we weren't really able to leave the house. We weren't able to do things. We weren't able to go on vacation. And so we adjusted our working styles to all of this now free time that we had. And as we start to return to some semblance of normalcy, as we start to, some are returning to the office, some are still remaining working from home, it really makes us have to re-examine how we're operating as an organization, and particularly from an L&D strategy, how we're supporting our employees. And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So before I get into that, I do want to give you a little information about Infopro Learning. So Infopro Learning has 3 mission and brand promises that we commit to all of our customers. So number 1, we want to create meaningful learning experiences. So all about those learners and making sure that we're not just creating content, we're not just churning out modules and learner journeys, but we're really creating a great experience that helps them transition what they need to know to capability and confidence on the job. We also want to create measurable performance impact. So we like working with our customers to figure out what is the return on the investment that they're looking for, to help them figure out what are the results that they really want to be able to see, and make sure that we design something that will encourage those results for them. And then last, we want to do sustainable operational excellence. So we want to make sure that we're efficient in how we do business, that we create products that are going to stand the test of time. And we really want to make sure that we are providing the most cost-effective solution for our customers to get the best results out of the budget that they have. So the rest of this, I'm not going to dive too deep into. Gives you some of our clients, some of our awards, some of our experience and what we're able to do. That's a whole completely different webinar. What we're going to talk about, before I dive into that, let me give you a little introduction to who I am. So my name is Sheri Weppel. I've been with the organization for about 1.5 years now. I've been in the industry for more years than I care to admit at this point. I'm actually what I refer to as a recovering art major. So I was once an art major when I was in undergrad, became an art teacher for about 7 years. And as an art teacher in Pennsylvania, you have to get your degree in order to keep your teaching certificate. And I got my degree in instructional design and quickly exited that field. Been in instructional design ever since in varied ways, shape, or form, currently focused on really helping our clients be successful and helping all of you be successful as well as a part of our community. At the bottom, you can see a little bit about me. I love to run 5K races. My husband and I currently have a challenge to run a 5K race in every state. He added an additional requirement that we have to earn a medal in that race. So that's making it just an added challenge, added bonus to that goal for us. You see my coworker, Abby, who is currently asleep in the window to the sound of the rain. Also love to do travel. I work with an animal rescue. So that just gives you a little bit of background of who you're going to be talking with for the next hour. But let's dive right in. So as we reflect on the past 2 years, again, let's kind of dial back to where we were when the pandemic happened. I specifically remember where I was actually on 2 different business trips the day before what I refer to as the world shut down. I was on a business trip to Florida, and then I came home and went immediately on a business trip to Texas. And I remember that then that Saturday, my husband and I went into New York City to a beer festival. And I remember that hand washing was like a big thing. We had no idea what we were dealing with at that point in time. I kind of came back from that weekend and our offices shut down. They recommended that everybody stay home. And all of a sudden, we all had to try and figure out how to operate from our homes. All of a sudden, there was nothing that we could do to go out because everything was shut down. And so we started to do a lot of things as a stopgap measure. So every meeting wound up being a Zoom or a Teams meeting or something like that. We moved to, let's make sure our cameras are always on so that we can see each other's expressions and we can feel that connectedness. We moved to, I think, a lot more meetings than we used to try and compensate for the fact that we couldn't catch each other in the office and just catch each other on the side and have conversations. And so we made a lot of things to adjust to the world that we were currently living in, which was this world of isolation. Now that we are a bit out of that world of isolation, at least in most regions, and we're able to go out in the public and we're able to socialize and go different places. And now that we do have people who are in the office and it's been, 2 years post the beginning of the pandemic, we need to reflect on some important questions about, do we always need to have our camera on? For example, it was a conversation I had with our head of marketing last time I did a webinar, and I said, do I need to have my camera on for the webinar? And he said, well, you could. And he goes, but honestly, sometimes it's distracting from the slides. There's a lot of times where if we're having a difficult conversation or we're having a difficult or dynamic dialogue, we might opt to have our cameras on because it helps demystify statements sometimes. If you can see somebody's expression and then you could see them smiling, you realize that they're not really mad. Whereas if you're just hearing their voice, sometimes you can't tell. Point number 2 of could this meeting have been an email? That's a constant conversation that we have right now is we've lost the ability to now just IM somebody a quick question. Like we feel as if we need to always put that meeting on calendar. And it's really bogging people down. It's giving us less time to get work done. We also have to think about, is a hybrid learning experience engaging for all participants? I've had a lot of customers who are dealing now with they want to do in-person classroom, but they still have people who are uncomfortable with that. And so what they'll do is they'll have those that are uncomfortable dial in and be virtual participants in that live classroom. And what is that experience like for all of those participants? If anybody's ever been a virtual participant to a live meeting, you know that it's very difficult to get a word in. It's very difficult to contribute. One of the other questions that we frequently ask that we're going to talk through is, do our people feel connected? If I always chuckle at this, but sometimes I'll call up some of our team members and I'll do what I just said. I'll put a call on calendar and just say like catch up. And, immediately upon launching into the call, they'll start giving me a rundown of where all their projects are and what's going on. And I'll be like, no, I want to know how you are. I want to know how you are as a human being. And sometimes we can't find that time in the day, but we really need to make sure that our people feel connected, particularly if we hired them in a location where perhaps we don't have a physical presence, they don't have a community. How do we make our people feel connected? And how do we make sure that we're approachable to ask questions? Now that we're not somebody that they can see as they walk to the water cooler, how do we know that they feel comfortable interrupting or IMing us or things like that? And so we're going to take a look at all of these elements because for me, an L&D strategy is not just about the training design. And if you came here to just hear about components of training design and how we can train people in different ways, you might be a little bit disappointed because I want to expand that conversation. L&D is more than just the actual training content. It's the communities that you build. It's the coaching and mentoring that you provide. It's the connectedness that people feel. That is all a part of L&D. And it's really all of those pieces that wrap around the content that we create and those learning experiences that we create that's missing in this hybrid world. And so that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. So what are we missing? Let's start talking about what are the benefits of in-person training. So we used to really be able to truly focus when we were learning in person. We could make all sorts of rules about the fact that, and I can still picture the slide in my head of, cell phone goes in your bag, ringer is turned off, vibrate is turned off, there'll be breaks, don't check your email, don't have side conversation, all of those etiquette type things that we would have. Now we find that we're conducting things virtually or conducting things in a hybrid. Now it's a whole lot easier to discreetly have your cell phone on your lap in the middle of a meeting and be answering emails and text messages. It's easy to turn your phone off and maybe be doing the laundry or the dishes during a training session. There's so many things that you can do in a hybrid world that may mean that you're not as focused as you once used to when you were that captive audience in the room. So I put a couple of pictures on the screen, and I want us to start to think about what are the things that we're missing out on. So these are just some images that I pulled that resonated with me as things that I am currently missing out on, or things that I, during the pandemic really missed out on. And it just gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what some of those moments in our lives were when we were all together and we were all in the same space. So I'm going to expand to, these are some of the benefits to being in person. So when we were all in person, we could have that one-on-one coaching. So if I didn't understand something, I could walk over to my boss, my manager, a colleague, and I could say, this spreadsheet really doesn't make sense to me. Could you kind of walk me through it? I have very vivid memories of sitting in a conference room where somebody has put a spreadsheet up on the TV and been walking us through the different components of it. And while, yes, you can do that from a Teams perspective or from a webinar perspective, what you miss out on is the facial expressions of somebody when they don't get it. Unfortunately, with a lot of the webinar software, you can't sometimes screen share and see people's faces at the same time. And so we miss that element of being able to glance at the person you're talking to or explaining to and see the furrowed brow and see the confused expression and know that it's not resonating and you need to try again. We're missing out on active workshops where we get to go all in a room and we get a big pile of sticky notes and we get to work together and move the sticky notes around and figure out how we're going to solve for a particular problem together. The third one is one that I really, really resonates with me is learning without disruption. And so it is very difficult sometimes to find the space to learn when you're in a hybrid space. When I was in an office, I could close my door. People knew that when my door was closed, that meant that, I was focusing on something, and it was really kind of a true do not disturb sign. Now I can't control when the Amazon person is going to come and deliver. I can't control when somebody is going to come to the front door and try and sell me something. I can't control when Abby, my coworker, is going to need to go outside. I can turn on the do not disturb and I can turn off email and remove those distractions, but it's a lot more difficult to, tell kids, tell family members that they need to stay away if you're truly trying to focus. We also miss the ability to have those casual connections. It feels like everything is structured now. Everything is very formal. Everything has to be planned. And so we miss the ability to just stand outside of the refrigerator while the coffee is brewing and catch up with somebody about their day. As soon as we dive into even one-on-one sessions, we're often diving right into topics and not spending the time to talk about our days or our evenings or what's going on in our lives or our family or anything like that. We're also missing a lot of that collaboration in person. So I was just actually on a call earlier this morning where you have to be very, and I'm getting a little bit into the solution-y space, but you have to be very focused on making sure that collaboration is occurring, because it's very easy for a voice to be quiet. It's very easy to be, and luckily this was a very small call. There were only 3 people other than me. But even in that small call, I found that I had to call on individuals and say, are you okay with what we're suggesting? Do you have any additional feedback? Because when you are virtual, particularly if you're a hybrid and you have some people in the room and you're the lone voice on the phone, it's very difficult to have the confidence to make sure that your voice is heard. And the biggest one, and this is, I think, one of the biggest pain points that our teams talk about, is the on-the-fly questions. If you can get into a good rhythm and you can get into a good space where people feel comfortable IMing you that they're going to get a quick response, you can get some of that back. But we are missing the space to be able to just walk past somebody's desk and be like, hey, do you have such and such? And there's such a different feel that comes from walking past somebody's desk and being like, hey, so did we send out that proposal? Versus sending an email that goes, was that proposal sent? as soon as you put it into an email, a lot of people have kind of a visceral reaction to, are you trying to get me in trouble, or are you trying to get a paper trail or something like that? Whereas when it's a casual question, it doesn't have the same feel to it. So emotion is tied to a lot of these decisions as well. So the big question is, I've talked a lot about what the problems are, but let's talk about what some of those solutions are. So how would we transition these experiences? So we can build a coaching program with structure to support remote employees. One of the things that we started to do is, we may have people in our company inside of India, we have probably 15 different regions in which we have people located. Prior to the pandemic, we had 3 offices. And so now we have a lot more regions to be able to cover. And so what we've done is we've started to identify who lives where, to be able to provide those points in which those individuals, even if they don't work together on a daily basis, like it might be marketing, getting together with sales, getting together with delivery, to at least go and have a meal, at least go and do some community service. Finding a way to support those remote employees, making sure that they have a local coach who maybe can have that face-to-face with them, allows us to be able to give that support. And a lot of it from a leader perspective is building a relationship with those employees that they feel comfortable asking you questions, and they feel comfortable even coaching from a remote setting. I was super excited last week. I actually got to meet one of my biggest collaborators in person, and I've been working with him for a year and a half. This week coming up, I get to meet one of my learning experience architects for the first time, and I'm super excited to see her in person. But we've worked very hard to build a virtual relationship over the past year and a half. For collaboration, we can build, when we're doing a collaboration, we can build a virtual experience or we can build an in-person experience, but I recommend not putting the 2 of those together. It's too difficult for individuals to participate when there are people in the room. So it's one of those situations where you either want everybody to be virtual or you want everybody to be in person, or you wind up having 2 such sessions where those that are in person collaborate, those that are not in person collaborate, and then you bring everybody together for a virtual calibration at the end. When it comes to getting people to pay attention, getting people to have the dedicated time, if something is super critical, make the investment, have it be in person. Make sure that they're focused. You're going to get so many other benefits from being in person as well, such as all of the collaboration, the community building, the relationship building. But if something is critical, make the investment, make it in person. If somebody really still has challenges with being in person, then you can make an alternative experience for them that still has that structure and that focus. Making them smaller sorts of sessions so that people can focus remotely and then be able to disconnect for a little while, much like you might have breaks in a traditional classroom. We also need to make sure that we're building in time for casual conversations and fireside chats. There's actually a fireside chat going on in our organization right now. It's one of my favorite things that we do. And what a fireside chat just means is that we pull together 3 or 4 different leaders. We have a topic of conversation that we want to talk about. And then what we do is we have everybody join. And so people can ask questions of those leaders. Those leaders can provide their guidance and their feedback and their advice, and it winds up being this really great thing that not only increases that collaboration, but also increases the approachability of those leaders as well. We can also use cohorts to create smaller groups. This also works great if you have a hybrid workforce, that you can create in-person cohorts and you can create virtual cohorts, giving everybody an authentic experience and an experience that's tailored for their current situation. But cohorts can really help us feel that connectedness. It can help us, feel as if we can establish relationships as opposed to trying to establish relationships in a really large group. And then last, and we're going to get into this one in a little bit, we need to build a questioning culture. We need to build a culture in which people feel comfortable asking questions. People are expected to ask questions. People are encouraged to ask questions. And like I said, we have a whole section on the presentation to talk about that. So when it comes to remote connections, next we want to talk about how to build and foster those remote connections. And what does hybrid really mean? So for the most part, we either used to be all in person or all remote. There were times I think in which we had, an individual who might be a remote worker or something like that. And honestly, I don't think we thought about it that much. I can think about several remote workers that I had, and you know, I'll be honest, I don't know that we worried so much because they were 2% of our population or 3% of our population. And so they just kind of suffered with a little bit of a disconnectedness. But, they kind of took that for granted because it was their choice to work from this remote location. Was that the right thing for us to do? No, absolutely not. It wasn't until we were all remote and we were all experiencing that all of a sudden I think we shifted our focus to that doesn't really feel good. So how do we help everybody feel connected? So were you ever a person in a remote, were you ever the remote person in an in-person meeting or class, and were you able to remain engaged? And one of the stories that I'll tell is one of my favorite stories to tell from when I was in graduate school. So when I was in graduate school, I went to this great school for instructional design, and they had held the class that I was taking the semester prior. And it was held all virtually. It was held in like WebEx or something like that. And all of the sessions were recorded. So they decided that for the subsequent semester that they were going to roll out those recordings, and that was going to be how everybody learned. And this was to give you just some background. This was in the early 2000s, so we were just really starting to get into remote learning and what remote learning looked like. And it was quite possibly one of the worst learning experiences I've ever had, because not only was it remote and you were able to email the professor questions, but you were this weird kind of third party watching it all go down. And so you heard the participants from the previous semester being able to ask questions. You saw those questions in chat. You heard that dynamic between the professor and those students. And you just had like an intense FOMO, or fear of missing out of what that experience was supposed to be like for you. There's been often times where I conducted a meeting like this where unfortunately due to the ability to get visas, we were holding a meeting in another country. Our team was not able to fly in for it. And I wound up having to be that conduit for the team because they couldn't always hear what somebody was saying, even though we had lots of cameras and lots of microphones in the room. It was very difficult for them to hear. And one of the great things that we were able to do to support them was turn on transcripts. And so for all of us in the room, we were able to speak. And meanwhile, they were able to kind of read along to anything that they weren't able to hear so that they could remain engaged. So it's very difficult. Again, my best recommendation is always going to be all in person or all remote, not a blend of the two. But if you do have to do a blend of the two, then you kind of have to think through those parameters of making sure that everybody feels like they can be engaged. So pros to hybrid learning are that people can join wherever they are. They can be there in person, they can be there remote. You can provide multiple modalities for learners as options. So they could join a live session, they could join a recorded session, they could view an e-learning module. The biggest benefit, honestly, and the reason why most people are doing hybrid sessions is because you can reach a large amount of people at a single time. Before hybrid was even an option, there were times where training was just not cost effective. We weren't able to do it because of the amount of cost that was associated with travel. Now, with digital learning and remote learning, we do have the ability to train large volumes of learners, and in a much decreased cost. We can also use multiple modalities to diversify the experience. So we can have some webinars, we can have some videos, we can have some e-learnings, we can have some infographics, we can have some instructor-led training, virtual instructor-led training. It really is the other big benefit, which is actually a benefit to the learner, where they actually get to have a much more enriching sort of experience. When it was instructor-led training, at most, you had the instructor talking to you, you had maybe a game or something like that occurring, you might have had a breakout session, and that was probably as far as it went, but you were still kind of captive in that room the whole time. The other benefit is that training can start the day of hire anytime. So if you're onboarding and you have a remote learning strategy, you have the ability to start onboarding from moment one. You don't have to wait until the next training class is held. You can give them some of that content immediately upon hire and start that experience right away, as opposed to either delaying hiring for when the next training environment starts, or having them start and then having to wait a week or two before they can get started with learning. Some of the cons are that remote connection is not going to get the same experience. We've talked about that quite a bit. You're not going to get that collaboration. You're not going to get the sharing meals with one another. You're not going to get the chit chat on breaks and things like that. The business will see increases to costs. So as much as it's really cool that we can develop videos and e-learning and all sorts of different modalities, there's a cost associated with that you just don't see with developing PowerPoint presentations. Do they stand the test of time longer than those PowerPoint presentations? Yeah. Do you have the ability to kind of transfer your costs for what you once spent on travel to creating this digital content? Yes. But the fact remains is that you wind up seeing a lot of that cost up front, and sometimes that sticker shock can prevent people from moving in that direction. Being able to conduct the training in large groups is what leads to a lot of that disconnect. It leads to people, you can't give that FaceTime to each of those individuals. You can't build those connections. And so people are going to zone out. They're not going to be able to focus on the training. One of the other big challenges is that multiple modalities can be really confusing as to what to take and when to take it. There are platforms out there that can help. Learning experience platforms in particular can really help kind of structure that learner journey and help people through what content I need to take and when. Otherwise, they're logging into a learning management system. They're seeing this huge list of content to take and unsure kind of where to begin, what they should take first, and how to proceed. And then the last piece is that training can be super isolating. If you're just given a series of 20 e-learning modules to take and you're sitting in your house and you're taking them, you can start to feel very, very lonely. There's no one to ask you questions. Even if you answer the assessment wrong, is there anybody really holding you accountable for whether that was wrong and following up with you? Probably not. The only time we might follow up is if you truly fail the assignment. So there's just a lot of isolation associated with that. And again, that's where I started to talk earlier in the session about the fact that we need to build that community. We need to build that collaboration. We need to build that structure around what we're creating as learning content to make sure that our hybrid workforce feels connected and feels like they're one team. So how do we prevent the con? The biggest ways of preventing the con are creating learner journeys to help them navigate the content. We're going to talk about that in great detail today. Breaking up larger classes into cohorts for camaraderie. So even if you have virtual instructor-led sessions that maybe have, 100, 150 participants to it, then having breakout sessions after that have maybe 20. Each of those breakout sessions can be held, they can be given, it can be fireside chat-like, but it gives everybody a chance to kind of connect throughout the learner experience. Keeping those cohorts consistent from beginning to end gives people an opportunity to build relationships. We also want to make sure that we're choosing our modalities based on the benefits. So we want to look at modalities not just because video is cool or not just because simulations are awesome. We want to look at what it is that we're looking for those learners to do. I had this amazing conversation yesterday with one of our customers where we were talking about some systems training. And we started talking about, initially when you do systems training, you're like, okay, I want to show me, try me, test me for everything. And then you start to really think about, number one, do I need that? Number two, does my budget support that? And number three, how is my learner going to feel going through all of that content? And so we started talking about purpose. So how often is somebody going to complete a task in the system? If it's like a one and done, maybe you just need a job aid. You don't need any kind of simulation to be able to do that. Is it something where there's a high risk of health and safety or a high risk of cost if they do it wrong? Then yeah, you're probably going to want the show me, try me, test me at that point. So really thinking about the benefits and what you're trying to achieve in your business outcomes when you choose what modalities you are going to use. We also want to make sure that we're building space for connection, making sure that, again, we're building that community, but also that space. Because all too often those calendars fill up faster than we ever thought possible. And there's just no time for a one-on-one. There's no time for a quick catch-up call. There's no time to call a colleague and tell a really funny story. You're just jumping from one meeting to another. So we need to be very purposeful in making that space. Again, the recommendation of all in or all out. If you have to do a hybrid, then do it very purposeful and still have those hybrid components, either all in and all out. But really, as much as you possibly can, try not to have an entire room full of people with a couple of people being left out, just being on the phone or viewing a webinar, because it's not a great experience for those learners. And then we want to make sure that we're providing a blended experience for all participants. So if you're creating that digital content for your remote workforce, allow your in-person workforce to use that too, and start to skinny down how long that in-person interaction is. It's going to get you a better return on investment for creating those digital assets. It's also going to get you a better cost implication of that in-person connection, because if you're able to take a 5-day training down to a 2-day training because you have digital elements, that's 3 days less of lunch and snacks you need to provide, 3 days less of a facilitator you need to provide, and you're able to take those costs and apply them to the creation or the cost incurred with creating the digital assets. So that blended experience for all is not just because it's going to be a great learner experience, but it's also from a cost perspective, it's a more efficient use of your budget. So 2 more sections before we close out today's session. Questioning. So how do we build a questioning culture? And before I dive in, a questioning culture is really where you feel comfortable going to anyone inside of your organization, whether it be the CEO, whether it be your boss, whether it be a coworker, whether it be anybody, and asking whatever kind of question you want. I will honestly say, inside of our organization, we have an amazing questioning culture. I feel very comfortable calling our CEO, Shri if I have a question about something, and he's going to feel very comfortable with me calling him and asking him those questions. There are still times where you do want that check and balance, where I'll go through my direct manager and that kind of chain of command first, just to make sure that they're given an opportunity to answer those questions as well. And so there's definitely some cautions and warnings with a questioning culture. You can sometimes skip levels, which can be demotivating to those leaders, and also sometimes doesn't always lead to the best solution. But we want to build a culture where people feel comfortable asking questions. So I think we can all remember, and I have very visceral memories of sitting in a cubicle when I first started as an instructional designer. And for me, it was very distracting. I know it was very helpful, but it was very distracting that at any moment, the person in the cube next to me could pop their little head up and ask me a question. Or my boss could come in and kind of lean against the cube wall and ask me a question. That being said, as difficult as that may have been, because I just like to be super focused, it saved me a whole lot of meetings. I did not have near the meetings that I have now, because those questions could be answered in 5 minutes. It could be a quick answer. Now, we should be able to transition that kind of flyby questions into instant message and chat and Teams and Slack and things like that. For some reason, I think, again, because when the pandemic happened, we were all a little bit lonely. I think we moved to more meetings because it gave us the connectedness that we were looking for. But now it's time for us to shift back. Now we're back in our communities. We're perhaps back at the gym. We shouldn't be so needing that connectedness, because we should be getting it from other spaces now. So now we need to shift back to efficiency. But that means that we need to make sure that we are available to new employees, and we need to make sure that people feel comfortable asking us questions. So a couple of ideas that I have around creating a questioning culture. One of the things is to open up a chat string for questions. So I remember that the person who supports our team in India, all the direct reports that work with me in India, he supports the day-to-day responsibilities, and he was going to be gone for a week. And so what I did for all of his direct reports was I opened up a chat string and I'm like, here's your SOS chat string. If you have any questions at any point in time during the day, if you feel comfortable typing them into this chat string, type them in and I'll get answers to you as soon as I possibly can. If not, send me a separate text and I'm more than happy to do that. I also connect with a lot of individuals on WhatsApp in case it's of a more personal nature and they just want to be able to have kind of a one-on-one connect, that we can do that. I also excessively use emojis. Anybody who knows me knows that there's typically a smiley face or something like that, because you can't always tell emotion in words. And sometimes that little tiny smiley face or the laughing icon or a little heart or something like that can make people know what you're feeling and what emotion you're trying to convey, but can also make it be more welcoming to ask those questions if they can kind of picture you with that smile on your face. Another thing is to reach out to check in. People are not always going to reach out to you. As much as I might want to say that everybody, you can open up that chat string, you can type a smiley face in it, you can say, ask me questions. There's still going to be people who there's something in the silence. So if you have an individual whom you typically hear from every day and all of a sudden you're not hearing from them at all, reach out. Because likely there's something going on where either they don't feel comfortable talking about it or they don't know how to bring up the conversation, and just open up a dialogue and see how things are going. Along with that, scheduling specific connections, which can sometimes make that easier because you're forcing that space to be able to talk. My big feedback on those scheduled connections is make space for, professional conversation and work-related conversation, and space for not. I used to manage a team in the UK of about 3 or 4 different individuals, and it was hilarious because all of my other team meetings were about 30 minutes per week. Theirs was an hour because we just spent so much time kind of talking about what's going on in our respective worlds and communities. We would talk about the Queen and everything that was going on in their world, and then we would pivot at the half-hour point and start to talk about business, because their culture was just more of a culture of connection and chatting and small talk and things like that. Always remember to pick up the phone. Sometimes just and I think my most commonly typed phrase is call me. Because if there's a difficult dialogue that needs to occur, don't try and do it on chat. Chat is forever. As much as some of them may allow us to delete it, it's still forever. And so sometimes if you need to have a difficult conversation, just pick up the phone and call. And then my last big piece of advice is to have empathy. When you're going into a conversation, particularly if somebody is upset or somebody's asking a question, before you pass judgment, before you give them an answer, try and put yourself in their shoes. Try and understand where they're coming from. Try and understand why they're asking those questions, and have empathy for what they're asking. I think one of the things that I also love to do is I love to tell a story. I'll get into this in the next slide, I think. I love to tell a story about when I was in their role. So I have lots of great stories about challenging moments being an instructional designer, challenging moments managing an account, or the time I sent the wrong email, or the time I forgot to send the proposal. And I'm a much better employee than it sounds. But we all make mistakes as we grow, and we all make mistakes as we learn. And so I loved bringing back those stories to tell them that I not only can empathize with them, but I've been there. I've survived, and look at how far I've come from that moment in which I've sent the quick email that should have been a phone call, or the moment where I was a day late sending something out. I've gotten past that, and they will too, and I think that's an important message to be able to convey. So 5 steps to a questioning culture. I always like a step-by-step. The first step is to make sure that you're open. A lot of that is in your demeanor and how you carry yourself. So if you are the type of person who immediately launches into a series of questions to get answers, that's not going to be, you're not going to be perceived as open. If you launch into why don't you tell me about what's going on, and you give that person lots of space to step 2, talk it out, it's going to make you more open to them wanting to ask you questions. Having a questioning culture is the difference between being proactive and being reactionary. If you have a questioning culture, people are going to ask you questions before the problem happens, and all too often you can actually present it. Like I said, step 3 is to tell a story, particularly if you're in a leadership or a management role. Try to remember when you were in their role. Try to remember the storyboard that you designed that you were super proud of that your manager completely rewrote. And empathize with the way that they're feeling and tell them that it's, it's going to be okay, and that it happens to a lot of us. Step 4 is to start to break it down. So once we are able to get all the emotion out, once we're able to talk it out, break it down into what are the concrete problems that need to be solved, and then inspire action. Step 6 I didn't put on here, which is follow up. I think that's an important step as well. Making sure that if they ask you to do something, that you hold yourself accountable to get that task done. Making sure that if you've inspired action and there's action items, making sure that those action items get completed, and making sure you loop back with that individual and check in and make sure that things have improved. So open door and open heart. How can I want you to kind of think to yourself, how can you keep yourself open for questions? So, one of the things that I did in a physical office was I had a very friendly office. In my friendly office, I had, a couch, I had, a little table, I had little personal touches and things like that. And that really kind of helped make it a more casual sort of an environment. And I'm going to briefly go on camera real quick. I think I'm on camera. I am on camera. So this is what my office looks like. I'm in a leadership role, so I'm all too often on the phone. This actually does convert into a desk if I need to type. But what this allows me to do is be in a little bit more of a casual environment. And in that casual environment, there's a little bit of comfort. So me sitting here on my puppy dog chair allows people to feel a bit more comfortable, like we're sitting in a conference room, or like we're sitting in an employee lounge and able to have a conversation. You can see some of the pictures on my wall, some of my travels, but creating a space in which that person feels comfortable, where you're not kind of at a rigid desk with bookcases behind you and everything feels like super serious, is something to consider as well. So going back to the deck. So this is the last part of our journey today. What is learning as a journey? And we talked about this as a particular challenge. And from the challenge, it's that as we create this hybrid learning, there gets to be a lot of those nuts and bolts. There's a lot of those bits and pieces that individual has to be able to manage and know what to take and when. And so what we want to be able to do is to make that more of a journey, and to help the learner be able to appreciate that content, be successful in that content. So when we start to have all of those different components, we need to make sure that our learners can progress through all of that content independently, so that they're never at a point in which they're waiting for us to tell them what to do next. So a couple of different things that we have is we have things called learning paths, and learning paths are very, very high level. Think of them almost as phases of that employee experience. So they're going to start with some onboarding, which is going to give them some introduction to the organization. They then might move into a certification, or they might move into some sort of role-based training that's going to teach them how to do their job. After that, you're going to move to more of a steady state of maybe there's check-ins once a month, check-ins once a quarter. There might be some sort of rubric that's used to see how they're progressing, what areas they still need to focus on. And then you might have some continuing education to help them continue to learn. So this is really learning as a journey. So not just that learning content or that learning module or that training program that you're putting together, but really what does learning look like for that employee across their entire time with you. This is really what we're talking about as a learner journey. So this is more specific to a training program. And so there's going to be a component, you can see a component up top that's for new hires. So if you're not a new hire, you wouldn't take that component. They would then have a manager coaching guide to help them through that. If you're not a new employee, you would start on that left-hand side, which would give you some of the fundamentals. It would give you some sales training, and then it would focus on that on-site. This is really that hybrid experience that we were talking about. And then when it gets to that level 2, that's kind of that continuing ed, or some of that more information once they've completed those prerequisites, helping them advance in their content. So you can see how this learner journey is applicable to all populations. We can really customize it and make sure that new hires have what they need. Existing employees aren't bogged down by some of that new hire content, and you can continue to learn more in continuing ed. And then when we talk about a learning experience, that really starts to get into some of the specifics of, what does the program look like? So, here we have onboarding. The onboarding was set at quarterly instructor led. There's a coach involved in it. We have some action learning enabled as well. These are just some examples of things that we've produced. Maybe then we start to get into the next phase of the learning, which starts to be case-based learning, e-learning modules, all off-site, all remote, so that everybody's remote and going through these different challenges. And then we have communication at the end, or other things that they're going to be able to do to kind of sustain that learning as well. So this just gives you a couple of examples of how you organize that content so that people understand, okay, where do I start? What different stages am I going through? How do I achieve success, and how do I eventually complete the program? So the big takeaway that I want to leave you with today is, how do we find togetherness when we're working apart? We want to make sure that everybody feels as if they're all still working on the same floor. We want everybody to feel as if they're all still learning in the same classroom. And so we need to be very thoughtful in how we build those communities. We need to be very thoughtful in how we build that coach-mentee relationship. We need to be very purposeful in how we build in-person training versus remote training versus hybrid training, to ensure that at all times our major focus is on keeping that connectedness and building that community together. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. I hope it is going to help brainstorm some ideas for you as to how you can build connectedness and how you can build training and a training community for your teams and your hybrid workforces. As always, if you ever want to continue the conversation, I am on LinkedIn. More than happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and continue some of the dialogue. If you have any specific questions, you can feel free to email or call the numbers on the page. And that was really where we wanted to end today's session. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to follow up on LinkedIn. Otherwise, I do thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a great remainder of your day, and I will look forward to speaking with you on a webinar soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.